history, which he no longer wanted to discuss. Of course, Prabhakaran seriously misjudged the deep feelings of the Indian people, and thereby ensured that the LTTE would remain for the foreseeable future on the prescribed list of terrorist organizations, not just in India, but also in Europe and America. Personally, I was reassured by making that serious error of judgment. It showed that he was not infallible and that his judgment and abilities are indeed limited. Responses to other questions represented a curious mixture of wiliness and opportunism. Some appeared to indicate the LTTE had a very clear appreciation of the then weakness of the Sri Lankan state. He said, "We don't think that Ranil Wickremesinghe is capable of addressing the core issues and is able to offer us a permanent solution at this stage because the executive powers of governance are vested with the President and his powers are limited to Parliament. It is because of this that we are suggesting an interim administration in the northeast. In the meantime, Ranil Wickremesinghe will have space to build up southern Sri Lanka. So it will be advantageous for the Tamils as well as the Sinhalese to work out an interim setup for the time being. Once this is set up, then we are prepared to discuss the core issues and negotiate for a permanent settlement to the ethnic issue. But now we believe the government is not politically stable or powerful enough to take up the core issue." By virtue of his own analysis of the then rather contorted political scenario, Mr. Prabhakaran should now be only too willing to discuss peace with a more powerful president with more extensive parliamentary control. But the LTTE gives no sign of returning to the conference table except on its own specific terms. It was clear from Prabhakaran's attitude that he left little room for compromise in the matter of the creation of an independent state of Tamil Elam. Prabhakaran is irrevocably committed to the creation of that state. Significantly, and frankly to my surprise, at one of the earliest Pongu Tamil celebrations in Batticaloa in March 2002, several speakers told the large audience that wherever there are Tamils, there is Tamil Elam. This inflammatory imprecation was not repeated at later gatherings. It was also an error of judgment, quite likely to be alarming to states from India to Malaysia to Canada. Asked about the statement he once made to the effect that his cadres would shoot him if he ever renounced Elam, Prabhakaran smiled, glanced at his heavily armed bodyguards, and observed, "That statement still holds." He said, "The right conditions have not arisen for the LTTE to abandon the policy of independent statehood." Asked if he recognized Ranil Wickremesinghe as his Prime Minister, Balasingham answered, "Ranil Wickremesinghe is the Prime Minister of those who elected him. Mr. Prabhakaran is the President and Prime Minister of Tamil Elam." It appears to me, in short, that Prabhakaran and the LTTE have not adjusted their demands one iota since those they made at the failed Thimphu talks with the J.R. Jayawardena government way back in 1985. The demand for territory for the nascent state of Tamil Elam grows ever more ambitious. Maps of Tamil Elam put on display at Pongu Tamil rallies clearly show 2/3 of the coastline of the island and almost a half of the landmass of Sri Lanka within the proposed territory of Tamil Elam. Such a division would deny the central state, or the Sinhalese state if you could choose to call it that, but the central government would be denied access to some of the best agricultural land and fishing grounds, as well as the best tourist beaches. Not to mention potential assets in the form of offshore oil and mineral resources, which will be available to Sri Lanka under the extended economic zone. Loss of the hill country, of course, would imply the additional loss of most of the lucrative tea estates. Just over 2 years ago, I said, there would seem to be little doubt that the state of Sri Lanka is headed for early division between a Sinhalese state in the south and the west and the state of Tamil Eelam in the north and the east. This division will likely be de facto rather than de jure. The Sinhalese are exhausted mentally and economically by almost 20 years of war, and there is now a widespread sense of resignation about the future, albeit with the implication of their own nation-state being much reduced in physical size and financial resources. And so I believe it will come to pass. Will the LTTE return to war? Another large-scale battlefield war seems unlikely, unnecessary indeed. The LTTE has effectively occupied all the social and political space in the north and east of Sri Lanka. It has gained much ground during the time of the peace junket, while the government in Colombo has given in on almost all points whenever it seemed necessary to save a doomed process. The state of Tamil Eelam, in many respects, is now in operation. It has set up its border crossing points, its passes, papers, duties and taxes, its police, civil administration, banking and political infrastructure. Even a powerful radio station, obligingly supplied by the Norwegians, has been allowed by the government. I see no reason whatsoever to revise my assessment made 28 months ago back in 2004. In so many ways, the de facto division of Sri Lanka has already been achieved. The writ of the government in Colombo hardly exists in the north and the east. It is not my brief here to discuss the strategies necessary for the state to reimpose its control over the north and east of Sri Lanka and secure the Sri Lankan state's territorial control over the north and east of Sri Lanka and secure the Sri Lankan state's territorial sovereign integrity. I believe it could be done, but it would represent the most enormous commitment by all those who believe Sri Lanka deserves to survive as a unified state. I do believe there's a danger which is little discussed. The ultimate doomsday scenario for Sri Lanka would be the imposition of an inequitable ethnic division which would disadvantage the large number of Muslims in the east of the country, claimed by the LTTE as their exclusive ethnic homeland. Their intolerance of the Muslim community has frequently been made clear, significantly in the attack on the mosque at Katankudi. As LTTE leader Karikalan told me 30 months ago, and he was disgraced within the fortnight, it is for Tamil youth to repossess the lands stolen by the Muslims. Al-Qaeda operatives have visited Sri Lanka and travelled to the east of the country. For the moment, Sri Lanka is low on the list of concerns for a revolutionary organization fighting a war on many fronts, from Baghdad to Palestine, the US to Europe. However, make no mistake about it. If Muslims are physically threatened in the east of Sri Lanka, then Al-Qaeda operatives will secure the safety and well-being of their Muslim brothers. The plans are already in place. And at that point, the LTT will find themselves for once more than evenly matched against an enemy which will be contemptuous of their limited nationalism and will be ultimately even more ruthless. Al-Qaeda might be the only organization in the world that could take down the LTTE. That would be the final battle for supremacy in Sri Lanka, which I trust we shall never witness, and that would be the worst possible outcome for the failed politics of appeasement. Meantime, significant evidence has emerged that the LTT has been actively cooperating with other international terror organizations. I've previously published my findings in regards to the links with the Maoists of Nepal, whose military strategies, if not their ideals, appear to be drawn significantly from the LTTE. The work of Rohan Gunaratne, an expert on Asian terror groups and a Sri Lankan himself, who works at Singapore's Centre for the Study of Terrorism and Political Violence, his work will be well known to most people here. Gunaratne avers that Asian intelligence agencies had reported before the US attacks of 9/11 that the LTTE were involved in training the Moro Islamic Liberation Front and the Abu Sayyaf group, two groups very, very close to Al-Qaeda. In May of this year, the LTTE's chief procurement officer visited Afghanistan from his base in Thailand, and as the peace process has dragged on, Western and intelligence and law enforcement agencies have taken a rather relaxed view of LTTE activities. That may soon come to an end. Gunaratne believes it is only a matter of time before Al-Qaeda fully targets India, probably with the support of its affiliates there on the ground. I hope this short paper has established three things. One, the LTTE and its leader Prabhakaran remain unreformed terrorists operating internationally. Two, the period of talking peace has been used to rearm, regroup, and prepare for another outbreak of war if that should prove necessary. And three, there can be no future apart from buying time in continuing to parley peace with committed terrorists who are totally uninterested in compromise.